All right, I'm going to try this again. Hopefully it goes better than the last attempt. In this video, I'm going to review both expansionary and contractionary monetary policy. And there should be note sheets up above of this video that you can print out and maybe fill them out along with me. And this is going to go through every graph that we've studied as part of macroeconomics, as well as the three tools that are expansionary monetary policy. Okay, first let's look at the three tools that would be considered expansionary monetary policy. Um, a previous lesson, tools of the Fed, kind of went over in a little bit more depth how and why these work, but this is still a good chance to kind of review everything. Okay, first off, lowering the reserve requirement means that a bank can hold on to more of its deposits. Okay, so theoretically, if the reserve requirement was 0.5, 50%, then if people deposit $1,000, a bank can only loan out 500. But if they lower that reserve ratio to 10%, then the bank would be able to loan out 900. So that would increase the money supply. Okay. Next would be lowering the discount rate, which is the interest rate that the Fed charges the banks. Okay. So if a bank can borrow money from the Federal Reserve for cheaper, then they're going to loan it out to you for cheaper at a lower interest rate. And then last but not least is open market operations. This is probably the most difficult of the ones to really understand behind the scenes. That last lesson should have gone over it, but a quick little review just to understand that bonds is government debt that tends to be held by banks and large financiers. And they kind of serve as competition to loaning out money. Okay, so if you were a bank or a billionaire or something like that, you might hold on to bonds to make that interest, or instead of that, you might loan out your money to people or companies. Okay, so with that in mind, if the Federal Reserve buys bonds from banks, then banks have less money to loan out. Well, I'm sorry. If they buy, I'm sorry. Let me go back. If they buy bonds from banks, they're giving the banks money. They're taking bonds, so the banks have more money to loan out, and that will lower the interest rates. Sorry about that. All right. So moving right along, a couple of these I've already filled out. Okay. So the first one that's affected by an expansionary monetary policy, of course, is the money market, and here's what it looks like. Okay, we know that the supply of money increases and that decreases interest rates. This is a good time to remind you that the money market is nominal interest rates, okay, without taking inflation into effect. So the quantity of money goes up, nominal interest rates go down. Okay, our next graph is one that I went over a little bit earlier in this folder or on this lesson, and that is the loanable funds market. It's a theoretical market, but we should understand that if a bunch of fresh money is coming in through the banks from the Fed, that means that the banks are going to have more money to loan out, and that's also going to reduce real interest rates. Okay, now to move right along, here is kind of the whole purpose behind it. Okay, I think we already understand by this point in economics that when interest rates are lower, that people and companies are going to borrow more money. So there's your expansionary, an increase in aggregate demand. That's the whole reason, that's the whole purpose behind it, is an increase in aggregate demand. Now, taking a step back, we should know that when we cover fiscal policy in the next video, that this is the first graph that's affected. Right? If the federal government spends money on infrastructure or planes or teachers, GDP goes up right away. However, it's kind of an indirect thing that happens with monetary policy because of the lowering of interest rates. Okay, to move right along, good time to revisit our old Phillips curve. And we know that this is going to cause the price level to go up, but it's going to reduce unemployment. So that's the effect on the Phillips curve. This one, the Keynesian cross, we don't have to think too much about, but it's a good time to review that this is basically going to increase. This is, in a sense, relatively synonymous with planned aggregate demand. Okay, now most of these we have answered, but it's still a good time to just review expansionary monetary policy and what's going to happen to various things. Okay, first thing that we know about expansionary monetary policy is the very first thing that it does is decreases interest rates. The last video that I made got in a little bit into the relationship of interest rates and bond prices. We should always remember that they are a seesaw that have an opposite relationship. Okay, moving right along, our Phillips curve already told us that unemployment is going to go down. Of course, that's happening when GDP goes up. Okay, so we know unemployment's going to go down, GDP or production's going to go up, and investment's going to go up with those lower interest rates. Okay, looking at our aggregate supply, aggregate demand curve, we know that it may be inflationary, cause price level to go up, and in the short run, real GDP is going to go up. Okay, why would the Federal Reserve take such a policy? And of course, it is to lower unemployment, increase GDP, and of course, to lift us out of a recession or depression or global pandemic or something like that. Okay, so hopefully this is making sense to you and puts together a lot of what we've studied this year. Okay, this one is going to be a little bit quicker because it's pretty much just going to be the polar opposite of what we just did. Okay, the Federal Reserve conducting contractionary monetary policy, which, by the way, here's a typo, that would be called tight money. Okay, now having said that, again, it's going to just be the opposite, nominal interest rates. We know that with the supply of money going down, we know that nominal interest rates are going to increase. There's going to be less money available coming in through the banks. So real interest rates are also going to go up. When interest rates go up, people and companies borrow less money. Okay, we should know that's going to decrease GDP and have a, I don't know if I'd use the word deflationary, but anti-inflationary, lowering inflation type of effect. And of course, here is the effect. We would be going from point A to point B. We would be increasing unemployment, but lowering inflation. And decreasing aggregate expenditure. Okay, everything the opposite of the last one. Okay, so the whole deal that happened here is that by conducting contractionary monetary policy, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, which lowered bond prices. Okay, we know that it increased unemployment and decreased production, decreased investment, and here, by the way, getting ahead of ourselves, it lowered the price level, or at least attempted to get inflation under control. Maybe the rate of inflation was up at like 8, 9, 10, 15, goodness gracious, hopefully not more percent. And maybe, deflation didn't happen, but maybe the rate of inflation got back down to 2% where they wanted it. Okay, and real GDP is going to go down. And of course, the goal of the policy, here it is to get inflation in check. Okay, hopefully this makes sense to you. My next video is going to be fiscal policy now that we understand monetary. Okay, remember, we're going to have meetings at virtual meetings at 1 if you have any questions or if you want to apply this to some AP questions. Miss you guys.